like I say, like, I don't mean to be uncharitable. I was writing this and I was like, huh, I'm coming down on him pretty hard. And I was a bit unfair to Dennett too. It is hard for me to be nice about some of the stuff, because I think
Hmm.
that, like, there are, like, if you look at some of the atheistic scholarship out there, like Graham Opie or Paul Draper, or, other sophisticated, well put together atheists on these topics, it's hard to take guys like, um, especially Dawkins, seriously. Harris is a little better, but I still just think he's like, some of the things he says about Judaism and Islam are just like, okay, like, it's just very eye roll moments with a lot of this stuff. So it's like, I will say that at the beginning, and I want to just preface it with that. So know that I don't really, I don't have a lot of sympathy for their positions, but I wanted to present just some of the things that I've noted over the years that I've been paying attention to it. So let me move to the next slide. Okay, so basically what I wanted to do is kind of present like new atheism versus old atheism, and like why the new moniker. Even Dawkins, actually, I saw a quote from him. I was going to include it, but I didn't. He just said, like, I don't know why they call us new. Like, we're pretty much the same as the old ones. And I was like, nope, no, you're not. Uh, but turns out I was a little bit off. Anyway, the next thing will be just like, what are some arguments and answers to these things, especially as apologists? What would you want to say back to some of these, like, sort of pop level arguments? Now, initially, what I wanted to do was include an argument from each of the four horsemen and probably Sean Carroll. But it just turned out to be like, this is going to take too long and nobody wants to listen to that. We'll just move on to Q&A. So what I ended up doing was doing an argument by Epicurus, which was reformulated by J.I. Mackie, and then kind of pushing an argument from the God delusion, just to kind of like, show you the different sides, because J.I. Mackie and Epicurus actually have good arguments, in my opinion, and Dawkins is very poorly formulated, philosophically anyway. So old atheism. This is a meme that I found. I thought it was pretty good. It's a zing moment, just kind of like, it's the formulation of the argument from evil, and then like the bottom is just like atheists winning since 33 AD. So basically, the argument from evil that Epicurus poses, pretty old school. It's very, very old. This has been in the literature for a long time, and it was pretty well substantiated by the scholarship for a while. I think Plantinga tore it apart. But there's other issues there that we can talk about. So basically, it says, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both and willing? Then where is the evil? And is he neither willing nor able? Then why call him God? And that's the sort of like, there's like what is it? You got four options. None of them work well together. It seems like a huge problem for there to be an all good God and for there to be suffering. So throughout history, there have been a lot of pretty strong arguments against just God's existence in general. So you have Marx's statement here about religion being the opiate of the masses. What he's actually saying here, I totally agree with. I just think that it's not an opiate; it's a cure. But what he's trying to get at is that religion is he says religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature. He ends up talking a little bit further about this. He said, man makes religion. Religion does not make man. The state and society produce religion, which is an inverted consciousness of the world, because they're in an inverted world. And what he's trying to get at here is that religion is created by people who are kind of oppressed by society. They're dealing with the sort of dialectic class structure, flipping like an hourglass down the chain of history, which he rips off Hegel wholesale, but he's not worried about it because he turns it economic. But he basically just says that this is a part of the class struggle, and criticisms of the religion are actually pushing forward toward human happiness, because once we can get rid of this sort of opiate that's just getting rid of the symptoms, we can kind of get to the real root of the issue and let the working class proletariat people rise up and overturn the bourgeoisie and actually create a communist state, which is his shtick. And he's saying that religion is sort of like a veil between the two. And he thinks that that's false. So let's go on to Freud. Freud has a pretty sophisticated case in terms of just the way that he formulates it. I shouldn't say sophisticated, it's more imaginative than anything else. He basically wants to say that where religion came from was in primordial states that we find ourselves in as like, a pre-hominid people, much less sophisticated human beings that would have turned into conscious agents like ourselves, basically had the urge to kill the father to get to the mother in this sort of Oedipus. If you guys know what Oedipus Rex is, like he wants to say there were a group of sons who all were jealous of the father's possession of the mother, and the group of sons kill the father. And realize what they've done. They realize that the father was not only their enemy because he held all the women, but because he was also their model because they wanted to be like him. And they see what they've done and they go, oh man, this is like they notice in their sort of precognitive brains that they've done something terrible, and so they eat the father as a ritual. And this is his story. I could give you a larger quote on that. I think it's kind of Oshio's. Basically, he just says where religious questions are concerned, people are guilty of every possible sort of dishonesty and intellectual misdemeanor. This is all part of a psychological sort of tick, maybe even a virus, as some people have suggested, that people deal with because of their unconscious desires being suppressed over time. And what they're really doing with religion is trying to explain these things that are manifesting this way. And in his sort of what he calls a vision of what happened where the sons eat the father, it's like that's also where we get the communion from in Christianity. And basically he just says this is all just, it's hogwash. All of it's hogwash. You are guilty of all kinds of issues psychologically. It has no ground in reality. You're just trying to deal with your subconscious. And that's Freud's sort of push. That's more old atheism. I'm a bigger fan of Marx and Freud. Nietzsche has some stuff to say about this. I don't find Nietzsche very interesting. I think that Freud and Marx do better combined what Nietzsche did on his own. So I'm going to skip him. There's stuff here that I could go into, being Nietzsche talking about how the herd morality is what causes this sort of like, it's like an inferiority complex that kind of drives this. But all of these are what are called de jure objections to the Christian faith. De jure meaning you don't have the right to believe something, meaning ultimately you're just irrational if you believe this. The Marx and the Freud stuff are both not saying that Christianity is factually false. They're assuming it's factually false and then saying, here's why. Here's why we can tell. From the other side, we can tell that when you look back on this, it can be explained. Religious impulses can be explained in such a way that they're just completely irrational. They don't attach to reality at all. And a de jure objection is predicated on a de facto objection. Now, there's other reasons why the fact of the matter needs to be explained first. And Plantinga gets into that pretty heavily in the book that I'm kind of playing off of right now. But basically, I think that a lot of these arguments come from a more religion is irrational. Not so much that religion is false, but that it's irrational. It's just not something you should believe. It's meaningless. And this sort of comes to a head in the positivists era. But that's old atheism. And I think that a lot more of it's pretty ironclad. I mean, some of those arguments are not the best necessarily, but so that's old atheism. Let's just talk about new atheism real quick. So Dawkins is a zoologist. His credentials are a little weird. Technically, he has a PhD in animal behavior. I can't remember what it's called. He's not technically a biologist. He created the concept of memes. He's a very, very good science writer. And his book, The Selfish Gene, was groundbreaking. The Blind Watchmaker, The Devil's Chaplain. There's a lot of books by him that actually have quite a bunch of information in it in terms of science writing. But when he gets into philosophy, it gets pretty hacky, in my opinion. So then there's Sam Harris. He's a neuroscientist. I think he has his PhD in philosophy, actually. I don't know if he just has his undergrad in philosophy or he had less training in that area, but his neuroscientist background has to do with false beliefs. And so he's kind of poised to talk about a lot of these issues. It's too bad I really couldn't get into him as much because I kind of focused on Dawkins a little heavily. So Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, he's probably my favorite of the four. He was a historian and just like an intellectual. I believe he was a journalist as well. He gives a lot of really, really harsh criticism to Christianity coming from a historical perspective, the Crusades, other things that Christianity has basically funded in some intellectual way. He's very strident about it as well. Though I do like Hitchens. I think that as a man, his character is really, really interesting. And maybe we could talk about that a little bit later, why I really respect him as a person. But as far as his arguments go, I think they're pretty weak. And the other guy I really kind of focused on was Dennett. Dan Dennett is a philosopher. He's still around. The three of them are around. Chris Hitchens died in 2008, tragically, of cancer. But Dan Dennett is still around. He's writing a lot of books. He writes a lot about consciousness, which is what I study. And I've read his arguments pretty thoroughly in a lot of these areas. But like I say, we're going to kind of focus on Dawkins because that's where I ended up getting stuck. So just a few quotes from these guys. Harris said, "Theology is now little more than a branch of human ignorance. Indeed, it is ignorance with wings." Hitchens would say, "We keep being told that religion, whatever its imperfections, at least instills morality. On every side, there's conclusive evidence the contrary is the case, and that faith causes people to be more mean, more selfish, and perhaps above all, more stupid." Dennett says this: "If you think that it's common but unspoken understanding about faith is anything better than socially useful obfuscation to avoid mutual embarrassment and loss of face, then either you've seen much more deeply into this issue than any philosopher has, for none has come up with a good defense for this, or you are kidding yourself." So this is the sort of rhetoric that goes around with a lot of these guys. It's very, very strident. It's very rancorous. It's very attacking. Dawkins especially. Dennett is pretty sophisticated on the philosophy side, but when he starts talking about religion, it really goes off the rails. Hitchens never pulled any punches on religion. He was very, very nasty towards religious ideas. He was very nice toward religious people in general, from what I understand about his character. He debated John Lennox. He debated William Lane Craig. He's debated other apologists pretty publicly, and he's amiable about it. So it's actually good about Hitch. Dennett, not so much. Dennett can be pretty strident, though. Dennett has he did debate Alvin Plantinga, but it was a really small sort of thing, and you can only find the video that's really grainy off a cell phone that was apparently made in 1910. So it's really hard to kind of get a hold of what Dennett thinks of Christians in terms of like his character, but I guess it doesn't really matter. We're talking about in print, what they argue. So just to kind of give an example of what I think is a good answer to an old atheist argument, and just kind of to frame I wanted to frame the picture as like an old atheist argument like Epicurus's deserves a lot of attention. It deserves a lot of thought and attention and feedback, and there has been quite a bunch of it. And so I wanted to go through that just for a minute with you guys, because I know the problem of evil is a huge deal, and I don't want to be like hand wavy or quick about this, but I think the logical problem of evil kind of dies really quick. They don't make them like they used to. So the Epicurean argument from evil is essentially, if an omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient God exists, then evil does not. There is evil in the world, though, so he does not exist. God does not exist. It's pretty easy. Modus Tollens' argument. It's just basically like, if these things are the case, if God really does have all the power, all of the goodness, and all of the knowledge, then there's not something like evil in the world, but there is. And so this is inconsistent. So there must be something to amend about this. Okay, so Plantinga and Craig, and really it's just Plantinga. Craig kind of does a nice presentation of it. Plantinga and Craig respond to Epicurus. That's not strictly speaking accurate. Plantinga took the reformulated argument from J.I. Mackie, who is I think he's still alive. He might have just passed away. He's a very, very very good philosopher, and he reformulated the logical argument from evil. And so Plantinga and Craig respond to this classical argument. So essentially, restated the argument kind of turns into, can an all-loving, all-powerful God exist alongside suffering? And I changed it. I'm sorry, I changed the premises. It would have to be like, I'd have to work you through like all of God, freedom, and evil. So basically, we're going to start with this. Can an all-loving God, all-powerful God exist alongside suffering? And the key here is that these two statements are inconsistent. One of them has to be modified. Either God is not all-loving or not all-powerful, or suffering doesn't exist, or we're having some sort of issue with suffering existing. But I don't think anybody's going to argue that suffering doesn't exist. There are more sophisticated versions of this that talk about gratuitous suffering, which Peter Van Inwagen has addressed very adeptly, and Paul Draper has gone back and forth with him. I believe it's with Van Inwagen. But there's some pretty sophisticated literature on this. Anyway, but like as stated, basically the Plantinga-Craig response to this is that there's two hidden assumptions in this. If God is all powerful, then he can create any of the possible worlds that he wants. He can actualize any logical possible world. He can look into all of logical space, anything that doesn't have a contradiction in it, God could make that world work. I don't think that's true. And I think that free will motivates that. However, the argument technically doesn't work because of this. In order for this argument to show it's logically impossible for God and suffering to coexist, both of those assumptions have to be necessarily true. 3 and 4 have to be true, not just possibly, but necessarily, in order for that argument to go through. And it doesn't, turns out. You have to consider that if God is all powerful, then he can create any world he wants. But if free will is even possible, that means it acts as a counterexample to this necessity claim. If free will is even remotely possible, even logically possible, the argument doesn't go through. And it does seem like it is logically possible. It definitely doesn't have any contradiction in terms involved in it. The other side of it is, if you were to go the other way and say, well, God can create any world that he wants, then he could create a world with suffering, which he's all loving and all powerful and all good. It doesn't matter, because he could just violate the law of non-contradiction and say both are true. But nobody believes that. So I would go with the attack that the free will defense, which is the typical defense throughout the history of Christendom, on this argument, that it works, that it is logically possible for the problem of evil to be defanged. It's logically possible for free will to exist. And so unless you say that it is logically impossible for free will to exist, you have to just say that that argument doesn't go through. The argument definitely fails. And as Craig actually writes in his book on God, I'm therefore pleased to be able to report that after centuries of discussion, the books on logical version of the problem of evil have been closed. It's widely admitted by both atheists and theist philosophers alike that the logical version of the problem of evil is of suffering is bankrupt. The burden of proof that it lays on the atheist's shoulders, namely trying to show that the coexistence of God and suffering is impossible, is just too heavy to bear. Recently, though, at Talbot, there was a guy who came by who's actually, I think he was a former theist. I'm not sure if he's still a theist, but he basically believes the logical problem of evil can be revived. He's a professor. I can't remember from where, it's escaping my memory. But this is not a dead issue, but it's pretty much a dead issue. J.I. Mackie has even said, like, yeah, there's no contradiction there. You can't derive an explicit contradiction from these terms. So it's pretty dead in the water in terms of the logical side. I will say this, though: the evidential side of the problem of evil is still alive and well. That's why Peter Van Inwagen and other people are pushing against it. I guess my point of that section, I'm talking a lot. I could feel everybody just being like, was he going to shut up? He hasn't stopped. Since I feel that way, I guess the point of the section was, I think that some of these issues can be extremely sophisticated, and I think that he can be divisive and pushy, and there's different sides. There's a dialectic. It's very, very strong on both sides. There's a big tug of war with a lot of this stuff, but it's not so much with the new atheists. And I'll see if I can demonstrate that for you, and we'll see how you feel about it. So one quote in The Blind Watchmaker that I just wanted to focus on was this one: all appearances to the contrary, the only watchmaker in nature is the blind forces of physics. A true watchmaker has foresight. He designs his cogs and springs and plans their interconnections with a future purpose in his mind's eye. Natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process which Darwin discovered, and which we now know is the explanation for existence and apparently purposeful form of all life, has no purpose in mind. It has no mind and no mind's eye. It does not plan for the future. It has no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play a role of a watchmaker in nature, it is the blind watchmaker. Okay, so this is basically an argument against design. Like, if you look around in nature and you're Cont and you look at the snow and you see a flower poke out of the snow when it's winter, you just decide that beauty says that God exists. A lot of those arguments were really, really strongly hit by David Hume. And Dawkins is he plays on Hume quite a bunch. But this here, Dawkins is speaking partly in his field, and he really is saying that what Darwin discovered just shows that there's no reason why we should have any notion of intention. It just is crowded out by the Darwinistic explanation. That's his essential argument here. distilled down, which is done by Plantinga in a book by Where the Conflict Really Lies. He ends up saying something to this effect: we know of no irrefutable objections to its being biologically possible that all of life has come by way of unguided Darwinian processes. Therefore, all of life has to be by way of unguided Darwinistic processes or Darwinian processes. Now, there's an issue here because he's saying quite a bunch more in this bit than in this one. So why is this the distillation? So let me see if I can lay it out for you. Basically, what Dawkins claims is that the living world came to be by way of unguided evolution. The evidence of evolution, he says, reveals a universe without design. What he actually argues, however, is that there is a Darwinian series for contemporary life forms. So in his book, basically what he ends up saying is, if we're talking about something like a mammalian eye, and we decided that this all had to come like one of Dawkins's eyes is the actual example that's used. Imagine Dawkins's left eye, just picture it. All right, we'll go back to the slide if you want. We can see his picture. So imagine his left eye. There is a trail of changes temporally and in logical space of each of the nodes of this trail would lead all the way back. If you put an X on all of them, you could find a trail all the way back to the very, very origin of life, along with every other mammalian eye and every other mammalian anything, any living organism. If we really wanted to trace it out, we could find this tracing of that. Each of the nodes that lead all the way to Dawkins's left eye would be traced with X's all the way through logical space, and you could find it. It definitely could exist, is what he ends up arguing. Now, the problem is that's not a very strong argument. The idea that it could have happened that way, that unguided evolution could have done this, is not a very compelling argument. But what he ends up saying, though, is that's what we're looking at when we look at nature. Now, the problem with that is he's not substantiating his claim. Now, I'm not trying to, and neither is Plantinga, who's really arguing this. He's not trying to say that unless you can show me this trail all the way from the origin of life to Dawkins's left eye, then I'm never going to believe. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that even if it were an airtight, I'm going to look at the quote on the bottom, even if it were airtight, it wouldn't show that the living world, let alone the entire universe, is without design. At best, it would show, given a couple assumptions, that it's not astronomically improbable that the living world was produced by guided evolution and hence without design. That is an extremely weak argument. He's saying that it is logically possible, that it's biologically possible that this definitely happened. And if you disbelieve that, you're crazy, he goes on to say in the book, which is not inspiring a lot of confidence, especially since this is what is considered the, like, maybe not the gold standard for new atheism, but it's like the God delusion is extremely popular among atheists. And I think that that's really unfortunate. Plantinga goes on to say, Dawkins utterly fails to show that the facts of evolution reveal a universe without design, though he claims it. Still, the fact that he and others assert his subtitle, loudly and slowly, as it were, can be expected to convince many that the biological theory of evolution is, in fact, incompatible with theistic belief that the living world has been designed. Now, a lot of the people in here are Christians. I don't know if everybody is. I don't know where everybody stands on this. I don't know what everybody believes about evolution, but there really isn't a way to show that either of these are completely false from the information given. It's really sad that this has become such a touchstone of the debate between science and religion, because it's still extremely, like, the arguments are extremely weak on both sides. Even like Michael Behe and other people from the Creation Institute, from what I've seen, they do a good job of throwing shade on other things, but they don't do a great job of making anything substantial. A lot of these arguments are really tough, and I don't blame Dawkins for pushing certain ideas about the origin of or the origin of life. But I do blame him for claiming these things in print while he has very, very little to go on. And I think that it's either dishonest or it's just patting himself on the back. If anybody's worried that there's not, that, Christians can obviously respond how they want, Tom Nagel actually comments on this, and Tom Nagel is a philosopher from NYU who's an atheist. He's an avowed atheist. In fact, he's said it in print more than once. But he resonates with a lot of what Plantinga says about these sorts of arguments, these sort of chains of inference that people just sweepingly make, especially Dennett and others. He says, if the God hypothesis makes sense at all, it offers a different kind of explanation from those of the physical science. Purpose or intention of a mind without a body, capable nevertheless of creating and forming the entire physical world. The point of the hypothesis is to claim that not all explanation is physical, and that there is a mental, purposive, or intentional explanation more fundamental than the basic laws of physics, because it explains even them. And Nagel has been in print many times where he talks about something beyond theism that should be incorporated into a lot of these arguments to kind of fill in the gaps that people like Dawkins don't bother filling in because of their just commitment to materialism. Nagel is pretty loud about this too. He's just very not satisfied with a lot of the arguments that get pushed. And I don't think this has to do with, like, I just wanted to kind of push out there that it's not about the atheism necessarily. There is some, like, if you're going to push for atheism, you should probably do better than that. Especially if you're going to be going off of things that are just they're jumps, and they're controversial jumps at that. I just wanted to look at this quote a little bit more. There's a lot here, but I kind of stuck on this all appearances to the contrary quote. What I wanted to push was the idea that things like this they sound really good in rhetoric, but they're just terribly misguided in my mind. And like, as John Lennox retorts to this, all appearances to the contrary, life has no purpose in mind, or natural selection has no purpose in mind. John Lennox, who's a PhD in math and bioethics at Oxford, same school as Dawkins, he said, there's a huge mistake in thinking that one explanation contradicts the other. God no more conflicts with science as an explanation for the universe than Henry Ford conflicts with the automobile engineering and physics to explain a motor car. There are different kinds of explanation. One is a scientific explanation, and the other is an agent explanation. And what is so important to recognize at the very beginning is that we have these different kinds of explanation. But we live in an age where scientism is a dominant attitude, and scientism tells you that science is the only way to truth. I believe that's clearly false, even logically false. And that's Lennox. A little bit more on this. Natural selection has no mind and no mind's eye. It did not plan for the future. It has no vision and no foresight at all. So 3 little quotes on this. One of the issues with the sort of push for, like, there is no intention in natural selection at all, and we know that for sure. I agree with that, but the randomness of the mutations doesn't have to be just by natural selection. Random doesn't mean that in the biological literature. And Ernst Mayr basically lays it out like this. When it is said that mutation or variation is random, the statement simply means that there's no correlation between the production of new genotypes and the adaptational needs of an organism in a given environment. Elliot Sober, who's a philosopher, I think he works at Rutgers actually, there's no physical mechanism either inside the organisms or outside them that detects which mutations would be beneficial and causes those mutations to occur. That's what it means by having no foresight. It doesn't mean that there couldn't have been an agent pushing from a different direction, especially a non-physical one. Alan Plantinga, another philosopher from Notre Dame. Clearly a mutation could be both random in that sense and also intended, indeed caused by God. The claim that evolution demonstrates that human beings and other living creatures have not, contrary to appearance, been designed is not part or a consequence of the scientific theory of evolution as such, but a metaphysical or theological add-on. Okay, so I think that like quotes like that, they sound really nice on paper. They sound like he's really hammering it home. Natural selection has no mind, no mind's eye, no foresight, no purpose. And then you actually start to look into what they mean by genetic, like random genetic mutation. You start to look into some of the scientific literature, and I don't know why he would say that, frankly. So I will say this, I do think that there's a real motivation behind all this, which is pretty rough. Dawkins basically thinks that you should mock people who are religious. It's the only way to get through to them if they're as dumb as they are. And apparently he thinks they're as dumb as they are. So at a rally, he said in 2012, mock them, ridicule them in public. I lately started to think we need to go further. We need to go beyond humorous ridicule and sharpen our barbs to the point where they really hurt. Nobody wants to be the butt of contempt. A little bit more sinister is Dennett in Darwin's Dangerous Idea, where he talks about preserving Baptists in a zoo. I can't tell if he's saying this in jest or not. Like, it really just feels like it's creepy. Like really, dude? Like, is that really where you're going with this? And like reading more about that, I was just like, okay. Dennett seems like he's probably just saying that to bother people. It seemed a little bit more like a rhetorical thing. Nevertheless, it's a little creepy that he would say, like, if, you know, we should save some Baptists because we don't want to get rid of some genetic, you know, we don't want to get rid of the variations in our species necessarily. We can't just nix them all, like ethnic cleansing or anything like that. But if they try to teach their children to be Baptists as well, we should probably take them away from their parents, because this is so toxic, that you know, maybe we can move them to northern Siberia. It feels like it must be in jest, but it really does creep me out that he'd say something like that. Especially in, you know, at a time, and well, I guess maybe I'm projecting our age onto that, but it does feel a little bit weird that some of the pushes against this in the new atheist movement are so strident. I think that the new atheists are not the atheists you should be listening to. Basically, that's all I wanted to say. I think that was pretty piecemeal, but I wanted to know your guys' thoughts. What should be a response to that? If, you know, whatever side of the fence you end up on, if somebody were to really push the idea that you should ridicule, like, let's say if that were happening in between Christian sects, or for instance, it does happen between Christians and Islam a lot of times. What should be the sort of response? Because it seems like as Christians, like, I definitely don't think that's okay. Like, that you can just attack people for their differently held beliefs. And I certainly don't think it should be done with rancor, and especially not with terrible arguments. So basically, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. But I really wanted to kick off a Q&A discussion with, like, what should our response be? Or, like, I guess we should start with questions. But I also kind of wanted to know your guys' thoughts on, like, a response to this sort of thing.
I think
I just had the thought, Jordan,
Aggressively orange.
maybe just to clarify something on this last point about like Dennett and Dawkins, about at least their desires to deconvert people or turn people away from religious belief. I imagine, I'm thinking like Sam Harris here, right? They have some idea, like, of some kind of morality they believe in, that they probably think that this is coherent, perhaps, but do they really? I mean, I know at least Sam Harris claims to have some idea about, like, okay, yeah, there's no God, but there is some kind of objective morality, and I forget how he grounds it exactly. But with, like, Dawkins and Dennett, do they say more about why they think it's good that people should disbelieve this, or do they actually just kind of say that to rile people up, as you're suggesting? They really don't care.
I think they definitely care. I think that there's a moral question on all sides. Like I said, that, like, my presentation doesn't feel very fair to them, because especially Hitch, because if he's just thrown in with, like, a Dawkins where he's just, like, shouting at a rally that everybody should just, like, deconvert their neighbor, that's a bit unfair. I shouldn't say that. I was trying to be more broad strokes so that we could just have the conversation. But yeah, I suppose like Dawkins would want to say that this is just you know, epistemically regressive. We're teaching people to tell each other fairy stories. It's just nonsense fairy stories. Like what I was thinking about with the old atheists like Marx and Freud. They were kind of basing, like, Marx was saying that this is bad for society. If you are putting up this veil of religion between you and society, it's giving you a buffer that's going to impede the sort of march toward progress. Or if you're Freud, he's saying that, you know, you have these fairy stories you tell each other that just constantly, you know, affirm stupid things that have no concordance with reality, but you do it because of these psychological issues that you can't see because they're subconscious. Then, like, these are obviously toxic towards society. And from what I understand, Harris is like that. Dennett, I don't know as much about Dennett's view about the world. I think he just thinks that, like, they're not nice to Dennett in the literature. Sometimes they just call him, like, Dawkins' lapdog. But that's because he's less popular, but that's because he's a philosopher. Dawkins would say that it's like you'd get some sort of, like, a quip, like, religion flies planes into buildings, and science actually flies planes. You know, it's like that's the sort of thing that you'll see with him, where you get him just kind of heavily critiquing the worldview that causes these terrible things, but he also does it pretty unfairly. Like, for instance, I think I can quote him almost exactly where he said, if all the scientists in the world just disappeared, deleted from history, we would be like savages. But if all of the theologians and churches were deleted, no big deal. It wouldn't change much. And I'm thinking to myself, what about the Salvation Army? What about all of the different pieces of like morality that, like, let's say Sam Harris would espouse? These sort of attestations to objective morality and things like that. Like Sam Harris would say something like Buddha and Jesus and a couple of other people throughout history were probably something like moral geniuses, and we need to recognize what morality actually is. You'll see stuff like that in the moral landscape. So I guess my answer is, like, yes, they have reasons, but their arguments for what they sort of purport, I think, are ridiculous.
Well, that's why it makes me just think, just to kind of tie this point, make it a little clearer. You could approach this with the objection like, okay, well, if atheism is true, then it doesn't matter what you believe. You could just object in that way. And you can make a good argument perhaps for that, and argue that really there is no objective morality without God, something like that. But they'll respond that, no, of course there's morality. Of course it's wrong to kill, innocent children. And they could use examples like that to try and really kind of make it vivid and give you a kind of visual reaction to make you believe it, yeah, or to get you to recognize it. But I wonder then, like, just from the apologetics perspective, if it's worth preparing for and going like that route of just trying to object to then their proposition that there still can be objective morality, or if it's just the other routes about like epistemology and what, the worth of.
Well, I think one of the reasons that this sort of has to get pushed is because a lot of what the new atheists push is that this is a commitment to reason. Our commitment is to reason, and we just want to reason objectively, and religion is just constantly getting in the way. But when you put them up against real reasoners, like hardcore reasoners, people like Tom Nagel and Plantinga, people who are like the Olympic level at the Olympic level of thought, they get trashed. And that's the problem, because if it is just a big appeal to emotion, then they're just evangelical atheists, which I'm no more interested in listening to than an evangelical pastor, like a televangelist. That they get described like this in the news, and they called Dawkins an evangelical atheist, I think, at one point. Anyway, I think that's the problem. It's like, if it really were the reason that they were making, their arguments wouldn't be this bad. So I have to agree with you that it has to do a lot more with like sharpening barbs and pushing a more rhetorically strong argumentation into popular literature to kind of vent what other people are feeling in terms of their frustrations towards religion. But their actual work, it's probably a good thing if people are venting how they feel about religion. I'm sick and tired of people not talking about religion and politics. The other side is their actual work is not committed to reason. It doesn't seem that way anyway. And I think the arguments against them are extremely strong. So, like, I guess that'd be my issue. That if they're coming at it with an emotional sort of evangelical perspective, then they need to stick to that. But if they say that what they are is committed to reason and objective reason, and they have terrible arguments that are just run roughshod over by professional philosophers, I just think that they can't hold both.
Well, there's always going to be something of a gap between popular literature that's consumed in bookstores and consumed at Barnes and Noble, and the stuff that's in professional philosophical periodicals, right? And the highbrow will always kind of look down at the lowbrow. That's always going to be kind of a divide.
Sure.
But
yeah, but is this sort of like I'm a big fan of Mere Christianity, like C.S. Lewis style stuff, and he actually has this distinction where he talks about, he goes, he wants to preach ad populum, and what he's saying, popular literature, and so like basically he wants to distill it for lay people. Is that what is it, like mere atheism? Is that kind of
no?
What
I
you're
don't think.
saying?
Well, I think that they would obviously just disagree with the assertion that it's just terrible arguments, right? That they would, Sam Harris put forth the book defending the idea of objective morality, that you can build that up from a secular base. So that's, defending morality from that perspective. Mm. And I think, in the case of Dawkins' evolution argument, as to dig into that a little bit, that's a terrible argument, because it doesn't disprove the idea that there could be a hybrid where there could be God's guiding hand and there could also be the evolutionary forces of random mutation plus natural selection, which acts as a guiding filter for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He doesn't disprove the idea that those two could work in tandem, because he doesn't believe that God is a necessary postulation. That before Darwin, there was the argument from design, which is William Paley, the watchmaker argument. The watch is in and of itself proof of a watchmaker.
Yeah,
and in the absence
like
of Darwin, that's a very compelling
things,
argument. Why? How else are we here other than God? So atheism wasn't really tenable before that.
Well,
then
see,
with
that's
Darwin,
the problem. But that's an issue, because it wasn't tenable. Like, I mean, David Hume pretty much eviscerated the design argument long before that. I mean, it's like you have a watchmaker argument, but David Hume basically said, why does it have to be an omnibenevolent God? It shows nothing about God. Arguments like that show nothing about the sort of creative capacity of a God that's like, he's also good, he's also loving, he's also, he has all these intentions and things like that, and purposes for humans. And David Hume basically goes, it could be a child God that is really intelligent sometimes, but just loses interest, or it could be a God with Alzheimer's, and he forgot all about us. Like, he created things, but then he got sick and old and forgot us. So I just don't think it's necessary. I mean, if you get the William Paley people out and pushing for a watchmaker, it's fine to say that it looks designed. But when you go a step further, like Dawkins does, and says that Darwin shows that there is definitely no intention in reality. It's just fully explained. That's the inference that's
but he doesn't
wild
say that.
assertion. He does. Well, you want to go back to the slideshow?
Well, he doesn't say that there is definitely, he's not an atheist in the sense that he 100% doesn't believe in God. I mean, you can't prove that negative, right? You can't say with certainty of anything. You can't say with certainty that you're not a brain in that.
I would say you could definitely prove God doesn't exist. You could show a contradiction in God's properties. But I understand that he would default somewhere. He would default somewhere closer to that.
You're imputing to Dawkins that he's absolutely certain. It isn't what he's actually claiming. He's not claiming that. He's just claiming it wouldn't be parsimonious to have an elegant explanation that adequately explains the natural world that we see around us. And also there's this other thing that we have to postulate that fills in the gap. He's saying you could have that, but if you have the elegant naturalistic argument, why also have the supernatural?
Okay, so here's the issue that I have. He actually says all appearances to the contrary, the only watchmaker in nature is the blind forces of physics. That's a big part of it. Natural selection, the blind, unconscious, automatic process which Darwin discovered and which we now know is the explanation for the existence and apparently purposeful form of all life, has no purpose in mind. It has no mind. It has no mind's eye. There's no future. It's pretty direct. And whether he's maybe he's overstating it, because a lot of times I think, like what Greg was saying, a lot of these arguments are like ad populum. They're mere atheism. He's overstating it. But as a person with the credentials that he has, he should not be framing it this way. Like, would you agree with that?
But people don't write people don't write rhetorically or for the popular audience the way they would write in a philosophy paper. That's why when you break a piece of writing down like that into philosophical propositions, you're going to lose the fact that Dawkins looks like he's 100% certain, like he's an atheist who is just like 100% certain of his atheism. But if you read like the earlier parts of the God Delusion, he says like, I'm an atheist about God the way I'm an atheist, the way I don't believe in Santa Claus.
Yeah, I'm not unicorns.
Unicorns.
Yeah. Well, here's the problem. I mean, if you have that sort of like wildly low probability for certain claims, and that's the reason why you disbelieve in them, it seems pretty strident to then turn around and say, like, there definitely is a possibility that this biological chain of sequence could go up from my left eye, could go all the way back to the first thing, and it's definitely possible. And so I'm so wildly committed to this that he says things like, anyone who disbelieves in this is either stupid, crazy, or evil, or wicked, I think he says. So like, here's the issue. I think that whether he's pitching his propaganda too high, or he's just writing to the popular level, but he's just going a little too hard, he's saying things that are manifestly not true and unsubstantiated by his own reasoning. He goes further with these things in the God Delusion too. He talks about the God, like either you have on one side, he makes two of these, he makes this dichotomy. Either you have this sort of this biological, purely biological, Darwinistic process, or you have this sort of God of the gaps, elastic metaphysical hypothesis that you could do. There's no other options that he gives to his reader. And then he says that if you don't take the naturalistic explanation, you're insane, which is strident work. I think that that's irresponsible, and it gives a bad name to atheists, because like a Graham Opie or Paul Draper never would have said that. Or like who is it? Who's the? I just read his book, not Hitch. He's a science. Is it philosopher of science? He's at Rutgers right now. I can't remember. Like, if you're gonna write like that, I don't think at least it doesn't, to my mind. Maybe we should move on, because I don't want to belabor the point too much, because you and I can talk whenever. But like, does anybody else want to like respond to that? Is there any sort of like, is that okay? Because the way I'm looking at it is just like it's sort of like either you're just going way beyond your means when you argue, and you're just going to say, well, I wasn't really writing for that audience, or like you're being sloppy, and I favor the latter. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say. If not, we'll keep going, because I like talking about this. Anybody?
I'll jump in real quick. I would just say that I do think, I think the idea that because something is a popular literature does not mean it has to be intellectually sloppy. And that's not an excuse for that.
But is it sloppy, or is he distilling it like that? Because that's the sort of, I think that's the claim here, is like, it's more of a distillation. It's more of just like I'm just trying to make the point.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about your claim. I'm talking about the general discussion here. Is that, you know, the idea that, well, of course it's not. He's going to make these sort of extreme statements or indefensible things because he's writing at a popular level. I think that's what I forgot who was just talking a second ago was me.
My name is Mike.
Mike, hey Mike. So I should probably take off my thing here. Sorry. I'm cooking dinner, so you know. But so. No, I think the idea though that, like, you know, well, to say that Dawkins doesn't mean that because he's only writing at a popular level is like, well, maybe he doesn't. I don't know the operation of his mind. All we have access to is what he did write and what he did say, and to say, well, he couldn't have meant that, and the idea that somehow, oh, he's only doing it at a popular level, so that's understandable. But there's a lot of people who, I mean, you know, Lewis wrote a lot of popular level books, and he did take a hit for it too. That's one of the reasons why he most likely he got passed over for professorships, you know, in the UK where he was at, because he was looked down on for writing, you know, popular stuff. But you don't find that sort of poorly crafted argumentation or excessive type statements like you find in Dawkins and Lewis.
You do find, to be fair though, you do find it in a lot of like modern Christian writers. Like there's some horrific work there too.
And there, I didn't say there is nobody that did that. I said that's not an excuse for it, and it's not an excuse for it whether you're an atheist or a Christian. And you get a lot of that terrible stuff in Christian writers too. And I think maybe that's what you guys said earlier. The label, he's the evangelical atheist. You know, it's like if you define that as writing at a populist level as an excuse to be a poor thinker, whether that's Christian or an atheist, that's not a good thing. Because you don't have to be. You can be readable and comprehensible and write for large groups without saying, you know, patently false stuff. That's all I was going to say. I just don't think that's a good defense of that.
But I'm making a really small distinction between 100% certainty, between Dawkins saying he's 100% certain of X, versus he believes X. You know, he doesn't believe in God versus he's 100% certain. And maybe I shouldn't get so hung up on that distinction. Maybe that's a pedantic small distinction.
Yeah, well,
But,
especially because
you know,
this isn't really about God. He's saying that there's no watchmaker. Like that means that there's no God. Of course that means there's no God, but what he's getting at is there's no intentions in creation. But even if you go there with it, like I don't even have to go to the atheist side. It could be deism, it could be just or Tom Nagel's panpsychism, where he believes that consciousness is already embedded in reality. Dawkins is just throwing that baby out with the bathwater, which is a little sad. I don't think panpsychism is very compelling myself. But if you're a Thomist and you think that maybe that forms and Aristotelian sort of metaphysics are in play, it does seem like you could say something like forms and different formal causation and stuff like that goes right out the window with statements like this. And for a person as influential as him to do something like that just seems like I'm disappointed in a person who it has the clout that he has as an intellectual to say that, even regardless of the God thing, because that's one of the issues that I get really upset about with Dawkins and these guys. They make claims that are just like free will is out the window. Like when Dennett and Harris talked about free will, like they had a conversation with like beers, like it was just like rancorous that they're yelling at each other. And I actually thought Harris was the smarter of the pair there, but Dennett is the one with the credentials. And it's like the stuff that they talk about, they're very hand wavy, and it's like it's frustrating to see like a lot of different forums and things like that populated with their thoughts when they're not really taken seriously by the intellectual community that really tries to get their hands on these things.
Jordan, if I may, not to slow the pace of discussion too, can you explain panpsychism for me?
So that it's kind of a middle of the road. A lot of people believe in materialism, and a lot of people like in terms of a metaphysic, like what is reality composed of? What is it and what is it like? Materialism is the idea that only physical stuff, only physical things exist, or only material things exist. Physicalism and materialism are kind of interchangeable. They're a little different. Dualism, which is what I believe in, I believe that there's something else going on in reality. Intentions and thoughts and propositions and probably other abstract objects are sort of embedded or instantiated by a certain sort of substance, which we'd call mind or soul, or I don't even know, but there's something else going on besides the physical world. There's like you ever seen like a movie projector where they've got the red and the blue? Like think of it like that. Like it's forming one image or whatever. I don't know if it's like that. It's probably a terrible metaphor for it. But what I'm saying is there's two things going on there as opposed to just one. Now, panpsychism is the idea that it's sort of like a dualism, but instead of like just persons or living creatures or certain items in reality having consciousness in some degree, there are degrees of consciousness, and the smallest degree of consciousness is embedded in the smallest degree of reality. So if we lived in an atomistic world, like everything was made of like beads, everything's like little things bumping, which is the sort of like atomism world, every single little atom would have like a little, like almost like an electron with charge. They would have consciousness. That's panpsychism. And so Tom Nagel's idea towards the evolutionary process would be something like as different, I guess, collections of matter became more maybe complex or just like clumped together in certain ways, their notions or their supervening consciousnesses mushed together in that way. And it kind of built into it maybe an intention for survival, or maybe an intention for something like an extending of that thing's self, almost like a mind. Like, for instance, I think Dennett Dennett actually said that I think there's people out there that believe that what is it, your thermometer has like one belief, like that it's hot or that it's cold or something like that. Whatever thing it's pointing to, whatever piece of information it's indicating, that it believes that in the same sense that we do. Which is really weird, but it's like the point is that it just gets really hairy. And I guess the main thing for pointing that out is somebody like Tom Nagel actually tries to give a sophisticated answer to this, regardless of how weird it gets. And it seems like Dawkins is willing to, because of atheism, because of a lot of things that he wants to push, his larger rhetoric, he just wants to hand wave this stuff away, throw the baby out with the bathwater in a lot of ways.
Hopeful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm curious. Maybe we could stay on this because I think it relates to part of understanding like Dawkins' rejection of design and what he's talking about there. So like the William Paley watchmaker that he's rejecting, I know you mentioned something about how like he's throwing the baby out with the bathwater and he's rejecting what, all teleology, all forms of design, because he's just reducing it to that as representative of them, unless he's throwing out like Aristotelian hylomorphism, he's throwing out panpsychism as well. Is that what you said, Jordan?
It definitely seems that way. He's definitely trying to deprive the biological world of intention. Any teleology needs to just be deleted from that, and that's really from Newton, to be honest. But because of the way he argues for it, just kind of saying like anything like that has to go, like, because we just know this now. It's been demonstrated. Darwin discovered it. We just know it now. That stuff is, I would say, out of court. It's over the top.
Well, I kind of wonder if he's doing this because he is familiar with like the thing that William Paley is thus responding to with this watchmaker argument, and just assumes that that's like the fundamental, like that's the assumption, that kind of materialist reductive assumption. So I guess it's kind of atomistic. But certainly it's stripped of teleology. It doesn't suppose it except for like from agents. And so anything we find, right, like a watch, the teleology of it, its use, its intention for what it's used for is just given by the watchmaker. So a human watchmaker, an agent like that.
Yeah.
And then when he looks at eyes and he looks at biology and any of these things, which seem very complex, then he can explain, okay, we don't actually need something as complex as a watchmaker to make them. They could arise gradually over time, and thus there's no extrinsic teleology in them. But does he even then consider these other ideas like about intrinsic teleology, which would be compatible with this form of evolution, which is like Aristotelian, besides the panpsychism thing?
No, not in the God delusion. I suppose that what I was fixating on or focusing on is the sort of claims he makes here. If Michael's claim that this is more of like a popular literature can cover that as like a reason for him to say things like that, I don't think it can. But if it did, then I would suppose that maybe he just didn't want to consider that because that's not the current biological paradigm. And he just was saying external teleology is just not, external teleology is out of court, so therefore internal teleology is probably out of court too. So he's not even addressing that.
Yeah, I mean that's just the thought. I guess you don't have an answer, a clear answer. I don't either.
He just doesn't address it. He says that all of this stuff is just not a thing. It's been demonstrated, it's been shown. Darwin discovered a process that explains all of this. We don't need any external anything. He doesn't think about internal teleology because he thinks probably something to the effect that Aristotle's metaphysics is probably just not even on his radar, which is sad though, because if you're doing it, it might be the case, but that's not necessarily what's going on in the biological world. And to make big claims like this as an expert in that field, especially since it's just like, oh well, it's just obvious, and if you disbelieve in this then you're out of your mind, I think that's just irresponsible.
Yeah, and it doesn't respond to these questions because like as far as I'm thinking of like examples in like where with quantum physics where you get certainly objections to atomism from the science, but as far as like probably you'd have to talk about powers, right? I mean, does he say consciousness is an illusion or something like that? Because
no,
like
Dennett
seeing
does. Dennett does though. That's not no, he doesn't get into that stuff. He's not addressing the philosophy, and that's one of the problems here. He doesn't bother, and the stuff he does on God, especially like the necessary being stuff, he doesn't even remotely get into any of this. And even Nagel actually recognizes in the same article in the review of the God delusion, is just like, he's like, it just seems like he threw in some philosophical trappings for the sake of thorough completeness, not be just for the sake of it. Like he doesn't even bother looking into this stuff, and they're exceptionally weak. It's sad because it's like to get into this with such force, because he's a very forceful writer, and to make these claims that he definitely does, they're either flatly false, or he's trying to oversimplify something that he shouldn't be oversimplifying. I don't think it fares well for him either way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking like simple, easy, straightforward, clear examples. Like you could say, okay, well, seeing is a thing. You could say it's a power that you can't really reduce in this way, which an eye has. it's not reducible to its parts in its history or even, its particles exactly, unless you were to just go that route of calling it an illusion, which doesn't really work out that well.
If you're Dennett, it does. Dennett thinks that that's exactly what he'll say. He'll say that perception is complete illusion. Qualia is illusion. I don't know who it's eluding. I don't know why you're feeling eluded.
Well, yeah.
I don't know why you exist at all. But he would say that it's all just completely illusory. The only reason that you have that is because other creatures like yourself take an intentional stance toward you. And it's like the idea that's just infinite regress written all over it. I just never really got into Dennett's.
So it's actually, you don't think it is that strong? I mean, he does go that route, but you don't think it's strong?
Who does? Dennett?
Yeah, Dennett's route.
I think Dennett's route is really just like, is completely like turning a blind eye to what's going on in the consciousness sector. It's sad what Dennett does in the consciousness stuff. It really is. Like the stuff that he does is like if you read somebody like Chalmers, if you read somebody like Jaegwon Kim, or any of the people who are making serious strides in the field of consciousness to try and understand what's going on there, it's like, what are you talking about? How could you possibly think that this all terminates in a stance, in an intentional stance regress, and intentions just arise out of things taking intentional stances towards you? How could they take one towards you? How could you have one to begin with? It's a non-starter for me.
Yeah, I had a question about that, actually. This is kind of tangential.
Yeah.
Do you think that all physicalist theories collapse into like nihilistic theories of composition? Because I don't really see how like a physicalist could push back against, like kind of like Merrick's, that all of the all accounts of macro physical phenomena can all be reduced to micro physical phenomena on physicalism. Whereas on like a dualistic or a hylomorphic view of the self, you have the whole person, and like you can't account for everything by just merely the movement of atoms or something like that. But yeah, that's what do you think?
So your question was like something like what Trenton Merrick's does, where he just says you have to, like, reductionist physicalist projects need to have some sort of like non sui generis. What did you want to say? Like it's just structural emergentism kind of thing, or you have to have unrestricted composition. What exactly are you talking about?
Yeah, I went in all types of different directions. I was just saying was that any physicalist view of the self, it seems like it can't really, like Olson in What Are We? He doesn't really have many persuasive arguments against nihilism, at least as far as I've read. I wonder if all physicalist theories just eventually just collapse into nihilism.
About persons?
Yeah, persons.
Oh, well, I don't know. I Janice popping in the corner there. Hello. I don't know. Honestly, I think that I kind of think they do, but it's hard to make a pronouncement on that. I really don't know. I mean, Peter Van Inwagen just kind of like says things that are alive have different sorts of parts. Like there's biological parts, there's biomiras or something like that, like mereological biological parts that help a life to continue, and then there's like regular parts. And people are like, what's a life? And he's like, well, that's what the things that are the parts of a life are caught up into. And they're like, what's caught up into mean? And he goes, let's move on. Like, it's just like, what? Like, no one knows really. Like, the definite life is wild in the philosophical literature. It gets really weird. Like, I think Moreland is an organicist, where he thinks that the soul is the organizing principle of the body. And he argues for it really, like, in an extremely weird way. Like, organicism, I think, is the name of it. He has, it's not Elan Vital. It's not that whole thing, because that's been dismissed. It's more like the soul is the sort of intentional principle that guides the form of the body. And that's what a soul is. And that's a Thomistic, what he calls himself a peeping Thomist in this area, which is the funniest joke in philosophy. I'm glad you guys are here to hear that, because I told it to you. It's the funniest one. But yeah, no, does it all decompose into nihilism about mereological nihilism? I don't know. I really can't say. It's hard. That's a big statement. I think Trenton Merrick's is turning over in his grave, even though he's alive. Was that a bad answer? I feel like that was a bad answer.
No,
is everybody else unsatisfied with that? Anybody?
No, that was a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I was a little too hasty there.
No, it's a tough thing. It's just, it's hard because these like questions, like one of the things that really bugs me about a lot of new atheistic sort of rhetoric is that it does oversimplify. I've seen philosophers accuse William Lane Craig of this, and it made me uneasy at first to see a lot of Christian philosophers who I won't name. There was a forum that I got to see, but they were basically like, he goes way too far. Like, he tries to make these huge claims and he should not be going, especially with the moral argument. But the other side is you get people who do the same thing in the atheist side of things. That over time, I started to realize it's like, yeah, I think the moral argument is more like a trick of words. I think that ultimately it's concealing something, because I do think that the Platonist sort of objections that I would probably say Sam Harris has to deal with. But I got to get into his a little bit more. Maybe Michael, if you have a little bit more insight on that, you could talk about it for a minute, because why not? But I think that like Bill Craig does go a little far with some of his stuff. Like he does make inferences that are like, it sounds more like a trick. It's more like the trick of a debater than it is like a philosophically heavy sort of thing. And I think the problem with new atheism is they do the same thing, except Bill Craig is he's a lot better at it, I think. Guys like who was it, like Josh McDowell, kind of like does that. Frank Turek, like more popular level apologists kind of do what I think that Dawkins and these other guys do, but they're popular level apologists. A lot of them aren't super credentialed, yet Dawkins plays it like he's the professor emeritus. He's like of like Oxford he's like a chair at Oxford. And he gets in popular literature and just says like, this is all proven. Anyone who thinks otherwise is an idiot. And anyone who believes anything about evolution that isn't across the plate exactly what everybody's pitching right now has to be an idiot or false, or they're just lying because they want to conceal their fear of religion, their fear of, death, or, some sort of like inculcated fear of hell or something like that. I think it's ridiculous. But I'm on my soapbox now. Other people say things.
Can I question whether the claim, so one of your claims is that new atheism is new, it is different, and the two pieces of that are that it's uniquely strident,
Yeah.
and I guess it seems like that it deals with evolution more. Because the earlier explanations of atheism that you gave were Freud and Marx, which are psychological and based on class more.
Yeah, but I mean,
you can
Epicurus was supposed to be like the de facto guy.
Yeah, okay. But also not a strident, also not pre-Darwin, so not dealing with the sort of evolutionary things. You can find plenty of atheists that do both beforehand. Someone like H.L. Mencken was kind of like a witty, jaundiced journalist in the 1920s, kind of like a big fan of Nietzsche. I think Nietzsche had a lot of stridence, and like God is dead. Diderot, the French philosopher, man will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest.
Yeah,
there's a lot of kind of
what's strident about that?
Yeah, pretty mean to religion stuff in the past of atheism. And then obviously there's a lineage going back from Darwin to T.H. Huxley to Bertrand Russell of people saying, hey, there's a new hypothesis in town of where life came from, and we don't need God anymore as a result of that. So, and I think the new atheists are really a publishing phenomena that happened in response to the Bush years, where there was the culture war around abortion and same-sex marriage, stem cell research. And then also you had 9/11.
Yeah.
So, and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Middle East more broadly. So that all of those factors coalesced into pushing religion to the forefront. So that's a couple different questions.
Yeah. Okay. So like, were you saying like, what's new about them?
What's new?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I would say that the scholarship is worse. Because they make claims like this. I think that Marx had some points within his framework. I think that Freud was groundbreaking in his work, and though I think he ultimately gets the worst end of things from Jung and other people in his same field. I think that those guys actually had something to say. And Huxley, for instance, was like Darwin's bulldog. And he's really pushy about a lot of this stuff because Darwin was discovering things, but he wasn't one for public controversy. Bertrand Russell, on the other hand, I will say, yeah, Bertrand Russell and Nietzsche are a lot stronger about this than maybe I gave him credit for. But I think the scholarship is better. I think the stridency minus the ability to actually argue for these things is the problem. I don't mind a person like Paul Draper is really good at this. Graham Opie, what is it? Somebody said William Lane Craig puts the fear of God in atheists, and William Lane Craig said, yeah, but Graham Opie puts the fear of not God in Christians. And like he's a really good scholar on this. And there's a lot of like C.D. Broad throughout the year, C.D. Broad, H.H. Price, other guys who were like really trying to push this because they thought it was needed, were, I think, better at it. And I think the main thing, it's not so much the stridency, it's the stridency minus the scholarship. I should probably have clarified that. So that would be my claim. I'm not asking you to just accept it, frankly. I know I like Diderot and things like this. It's like, yeah, there's some strong people out there. Even guys like in the popular literature, like in the Romantic era after the Enlightenment, the response to the Romantic response to the Enlightenment, you have people who were extremely negative toward religion, especially after the schism. Once the schism in Christianity happened, people were just like, this is a mess. And then you have, with Islam and these other sorts of things. So it's not as if I didn't want to paint this as one-sided. I just really wanted to kind of focus on why I think that a lot of the new atheist stuff is just not worth looking into. And that if you really were committed to an atheistic position, or you really want to see atheism at work, well, you have to look elsewhere. And like, as an apologist, I think that there are good answers to a lot of the atheist literature that is good. But I also kind of think that one of the reasons it's falling out of fashion, like you said, it's kind of a publishing phenomenon. It's kind of not that much anymore. I think that's more happening with cancel culture and the fact that Dawkins keeps shooting himself in the foot with his own Twitter. But these things, I think, are contributing to the fact that people are losing a little bit more interest, maybe more in Dawkins and less in Harris, because Harris seems to still be pretty active. But I'm sorry, yeah, that's just, I guess, I should have ratcheted that down a little bit.
No, that's fair. And yeah, I agree. It's something that has died down. I mean, the 2000s, it felt very much like that sort of like old-fashioned culture war. It seems quaint nowadays somehow to me. It seems like
there's certain forums you can go on where it's less quaint. But there's some people out there, man. They got some teeth. But yeah, no, you're right. I think you're right, yeah. Especially since it's not like there's not rallies in front of the White House anymore. With Dawkins telling people to mock everybody in public and stuff like that. Yeah.
Even Harris talks a lot less about religion. He has a meditation app that is quite, affirming the baby in the bathwater, which from his perspective is more about like consciousness. He tries to reclaim the word spirituality, and he's not like he's not writing the end of faith or letter to a Christian nation anymore.
Yeah. And I think that's probably a good move for him. I mean, it's like he is a trained neuroscientist. He does have philosophical chops. It's just a shame that like you get a lot more, especially with a lot of this, you get a lot more buzzwords than you do arguments, which I think is part of the problem with these guys. Like you get like people who do really good work, like The Selfish Gene and the popular science writing that Dawkins has done gets overshadowed by the fact that he's an atheist. And the fact that, that these guys do probably have quite a bunch to say. Hitchens in particular had quite a bunch to say, but it kind of got overshadowed because everybody uses them as buzzwords. And it's probably the same problem in Christianity. Any evangelical sect of whatever it is going to just get populated with that stuff.
But there is a reason. I'm sorry, I'm going on too long. But there is a reason Paul Draper isn't famous. I don't know who that is, to be honest. But he's not famous, and Sam Harris and Hitchens are. And part of that is that they make less airtight, less good arguments, probably, according to trained philosophers and apologetics people like yourself. But part of it is that they are really trying to reach a mass audience. And the way to affect change and talk to common people isn't the way philosophers talk to one another.
No, that's fair. That's fair, and I think that that's okay. But I do think it goes a bridge too far, because it's completely different if you're a William Lane Craig, or you're a Plantinga, or you know, even a Paul Draper, or any of these guys. If you write a popular level book, and like to have quotes like that be like strong and heavily pushed, like it's one thing to really lay it on thick. And really do it with a lot of rhetorical vigor. It's a completely different thing to say things that are unsubstantiated, to have claims and arguments that are completely unsubstantiated, and then say, like, you know, it's not for the philosopher, but also in the background to have them telling everybody that they're the arbiters of reason, and that religion makes people stupid. There's plenty of reasons why religion makes people stupid. Like, for real, like there really are. There's televangelists and people out there that just constantly harp on the dumbest points that you could possibly imagine, just completely treading on biblical scholarship. They have no idea what they're talking about. But the way to get at that is to actually tell the truth about these things. Now, is there a backing to that? I think there is. And one of the reasons I really didn't want to be a Christian when I started kind of being afraid it was going to be true, was because I didn't want to end up like these irrational people that just shout things that substantiate the things they're going to do or want to do, or people they want to judge, or just paraphrasing scripture in like a clever way. Both of those things are ridiculous to me. But I went into the faith going like, I will not do that. It doesn't matter what happens. That's lying, and we're not supposed to do that. And then I get down to it, and I think that there really are roots to this, but with the new atheists, as opposed to just regular, like, well put together atheists, it doesn't have the roots, and I guess that's my issue.
That's fair.
Does anybody else want to talk? I'm talking a lot. I'll do that. You guys don't even have a clue. I'll just continue to I'll do this without you guys here.
I think we're all intimidated by you, Jordan.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm not intimidated by him.
Or maybe it's just me.
Look at me.
It's just
I have my evil cat too. I'm plotting.
No, trust me, Julius is not intimidated by me. Neither is Jane. Oh, I think Greg must have left. Greg always argues with me. Greg and I will argue over Catholicism and Protestantism a lot, because he's really good at it, and I like to do it too. We have a lot, like, in the internal conflicts in Christianity drive me crazy. But I think that, like, I guess another issue that I have is that a lot of these are just non sequiturs, or just red herrings that just run all over the sort of popular notion of faith that gets pushed by the new atheists is like, I want to dig my eyes out. Like, I hate it. It's so unbelievably ridiculous. It's off the wall. And I have to untangle that knot, like, with most of the Christians that I'll talk to. Like, hey, you know, faith is believing in something that isn't true. Or faith is believing something you know isn't true. I'm like, what? It is? Like, that's weird, because Hebrews 11 in the Hall of Faith says, because we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and Peter is constantly saying, because we are given all of these proofs that are not ridiculous stories that are being told, and you have consistently throughout the scripture people going, or Jesus going like, which is easier, to say men are forgiven of their sins, or to say get up and walk? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins, get up and walk. He does something to show it, and he says it constantly. If you don't believe my words, at least believe my actions. Now, whether you believe in miracles or not, it still doesn't even come close to touching the claim that what we should be doing is just committing to things we have no evidence for. That is unfathomably non-scriptural, and I have no idea where it came from. But like guys like Dawkins who are mad about this, I'm mad about it too. You know, and then you get like, it's like, and so it gives them so much more credence when people are going, well, yeah, obviously that's what faith is. You know, Mark Twain, faith is believing what you know ain't so. It's like, that's false. It's false. It's been false. It's been false since they were attacking this for 1,000 years. C.S. Lewis attacked it. William James attacked it. There's no good reason to think that that's the definition of faith. And I have to unravel that so much that I'm upset about it. And I'm yelling on Zoom.
Hey, I didn't leave, Jordan, but I am gonna go. I have to leave now. So because I have an early morning. So
Climax.
thanks for inviting me. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah,
I'll
thanks
see
for
you
the
all
questions.
later. Good night.
Bye.
But okay, so I'm not as versed in the philosophy of this as you, but to say you have faith in something as
Yes.
opposed to say you have belief in something or knowledge that something is true are distinct and are often, in popular parlance, sort of opposites of one another.
Yes.
So I think that there's certainly a commonsensical understanding that you have faith in something that you don't have really solid evidence of believing in,
Yeah.
of solid knowledge that of its truth.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
I suppose. I mean, ask Dawkins what he thinks about atheism. See, like, you know, he doesn't have like you'd say he doesn't have certainty. He doesn't have like depending on your standard of sufficiency, depending on your standard of like what counts as enough. Enough is the key word. What counts as enough evidence for a claim? I would say that's definitely a hiccup in a lot of these things, because people, you know, some people I think popularly will say, like, I'll believe in God, like I believe in God, and like it's enough for me to have one religious experience, and that's enough for me to believe in God. So yeah, that I think is fair, but I also think that it's like depends on what enough means in that situation. Am I being nitpicky?
No, I totally understand that we're all mired in the muck of being less than 100% certain of anything, right? We
Yeah.
can't say with 100% certainty. So we're always dealing with standards of sufficiency. But I think that when we use the word like knowledge, or I believe it to be true, you know, I have knowledge of X, we still use those words even in the absence of ever being able to say, I have 100% knowledge of anything. So there's always, you know, the standards of sufficiency, yeah, are somewhere when we have knowledge, somewhere in the 99 percentile somewhere. And then faith is usually something less, though. It's usually something we feel, I can't make a really ironclad case for it, but I have faith in it.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would say to that. I mean, it's like I just gave a presentation to a whole group of Christians about what I think faith is supposed to mean. Like maybe just historically, or maybe how the Bible teaches it. It's like there's a lot of different senses. There's actually a Wi-Fi video by a teacher who is at Julius and I and Mac's school, and Jane's school, by his name's Greg Gansel, and he gives a presentation on this. He goes, there's two senses of faith which can be obviously distinguished in locution by saying faith in or faith that. And faith in is like the sort of like, I just kind of like attached to it. It's more of the assent, more of the emotional assent fact part of it. Or the faith that is a lot more of just like, I have faith that the world is round. Personally, I think that it's just a locution issue. I think that they're the same thing. If you say you have knowledge of something, you have faith that your belief is sufficient for knowledge. So it's like every single claim of knowledge involves faith, in my opinion. In fact, every bit of your faith, anything you put faith in, you have to have information about to begin with. You have to have knowledge of the pieces of information you're going to commit to. So regardless of the faith in, faith that distinction, knowledge is involved in both, and faith is involved in both. It gets really intertwined, and it's frustrating that you get guys like Hitchens who are talking about faith, and what they mean is irrational faith. But to call it faith and then just decide it's irrational is question begging when you're trying to decide whether or not you should have it or not. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's not I don't think that that's at all easy to figure out. But when, like, I think it's complicated. It does get mucky, especially with what people use faith in and faith that, the sort of distinctions. But it's been historically, it's been extremely, like for me, like I'll read you a quote. There's a big long quote from Locke in the critique, in one of his, I don't know which one it is, but Locke anyway. Faith is nothing but a firm assent of the mind, which, if it be regulated, as is our duty, cannot be afforded to anything but upon good reason, and so cannot be opposite to it. He that believes without having any reason for believing may be in love with his own fancies, but neither seeks truth as he ought, nor pays the obedience due to his Maker, who would have him use those discerning faculties he has given him to keep him out of mistake and error. He that does not do this best of his power, however he sometimes, this is really, really verbose, however he sometimes lights on truth, is in the right but by chance, and that's unjustified belief. And I know not whether the luckiness of an accident will excuse the irregularity of his proceeding. this at least is certain, that he must be accountable for whatever mistakes he runs into. Whereas he that makes use of the light and faculties God has given him and seeks sincerely to discover truth by those helps and abilities he has, may have this satisfaction in doing his duty as a rational creature, that though he should miss the truth, he would not miss the reward of it. For he governs his assent right and places it as he should, who in any case or matter whatsoever believes or disbelieves according to as reason directs him. He that doth otherwise transgresses against his own light and misuses those faculties which were given him to no other end but to search and follow for clearer evidence and greater probability. And that's Locke. Locke is not like your run-of-the-mill theist. Like I have people that have told me on good authority that he wasn't a theist, and they're like, it's really frustrating. Like you come across a lot of like ideas like the sort of Mark Twain view, and then you get C.S. Lewis talking about, well, there's a couple of different kinds of faith. There's the sort of emotional assent, and then there's the sort of propositional assent, if you want, the sort of thing where faith plays a role with your emotions or not. So if you say, why don't you really think about that math problem and you might get it? The operative word is real. And he's saying, if you actually just sit and think about it, you'll get it because of the way that your reason works. You'll believe me when I give you this proof. If you'll have faith in the proof that I give you, if you really just sit down and think about it. And the operative word is really, because you're actually having to latch onto this. But if I say to you, why don't you get up on that high dive and see what it's really like up there? What the operative word is still real, but it's attaching itself to the emotional side of things, where it's like now you're discovering the more existential sort of like living notion of that faith, right? The sort of living experience of what it's like to be like, oh boy, like this isn't as easy as I thought about it, right? So the sort of propositional stuff and the emotional stuff both come into play. But if you're Locke and you're Lewis and you're other people, you're making a really, really like obvious distinction between just like believing things that you just know aren't true, between that and taking something which you believe to be true or which you have to go on, or something you're experiencing and you have to cling to. Like those are completely different senses, and it's frustrating because this is a common problem, especially with Hitchens and other things that are critiqued in the new atheist literature with faith. Does that make sense? I just talked for an hour.
No, you didn't talk for too long.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously no one wants to believe in things that aren't true, right? The Mark Twain sense. I think the Hitchens definition would be something more like belief in the absence of good evidence. But then the question just becomes, what is good evidence? I'm a little unclear. Propositional faith, you gave the example of the proof, that if you work through the proof, you'll have faith in it. But to me, you wouldn't say you have faith in something that you've worked through and you completely understand, right? Once you work through it, it's just yours. It's just knowledge at that point. No.
Well, see, no, I would say that faith has to be involved, because if you were to tell me like my wife is cheating on me or something like that, I might say I don't believe it, even though I do, or I might not want to believe it, or I might delude myself into believing, or like think about like you ever seen the movie Shutter Island?
I did
like,
a long time ago.
Yeah, but it's just basically like the guy is just completely self-deluded. He cannot accept this certain thing. But the word accept there, I believe, is just a substitute for faith. If I get into different mathematical proofs, if you get into something crazy like Cantor's theorem, or Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and you just say like, no, there has to be a completeness theorem out there. Like it's like, but there's not though. Like it's like, no, I just don't want to buy it. It's like, I gotta treat you like someone who thinks it's just the case that Henry VIII wasn't by Shakespeare or something like that, or Henry V wasn't. Like, I don't know what to do for you. Like, that's a ridiculous thing. How much more evidence could someone give you to make you do the thing, which is the commitment part, which is the faith part?
But I want to make it really simple. Do I have faith that 2 + 2 is 4, or do I have knowledge?
You absolutely do.
I have faith. So
I think that the knowledge of it is, but you decided that arithmetic is something worth trusting, and you said trust. Yeah, I'll trust that. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that is so unbelievably intuitive to me, and it's really hard to get through to people. Like when I talk to people like a lot of like really, really just like people who are just been Christians forever, and I try and say like, well, I know that God exists. I can't say I'm certain of anything, but I know that God exists. I don't think certainty is possible for humans. That's not available to us as a faculty, but I know that God exists. And they go, well, you don't know God exists, you have faith. And I'm like, I'm going to strangle you. I'm going to strangle you. I'm going to grab you with just shake like a Homer Simpson situation. It drives me nuts. Anyway, but Max, I think, been itching to say something for 10 minutes.
No, I'm honestly just absorbing it in. Some of the philosophical language, if I'm honest, I'm still picking up on some of the terminology. So I know like physicalist, I just learned panpsychism. So just trying to absorb.
Yeah. Sorry about this. It is a bit fast. I wanted to make sure that I'm covering the material. One of the, I think the issues with the new atheist stuff is that because they're at the popular level, they kind of breeze across things that you can't breeze across.
Yeah. It's weird. Sometimes with the new atheists, I mean, just from like my theological perspective, it almost feels like one objection they have will be philosophical and then the next objection will be cultural. So they might say like God can't exist because A or B, but then next they'll say, oh, also Christians are horrid and shouldn't teach their kids any of this. And it's like, those are two different directions of thinking in my mind. So
yeah, sometimes just get confusing because there's different guys doing different things. So one of the things like Harris, somebody's in the chat talking about veganism. I don't know what's going on in there. It's getting weird, I think.
Vegans have weak faith.
Yeah. Because they only eat vegetables because what God calls clean, let no man call unclean, like stuff like that. Well, yeah, I don't know. I think one of the issues that we get into with new atheism is there's different people saying different things. So like Harris believes in objective morality. And he also believes that consciousness is non-physical, or it's not reducible to physical processes only. I don't know what he means by that. I've never understood. I think it's the weirdest thing in the world that you could believe in objective morality and non-physical consciousness and then be like, atheism is 100% true. I'm like, all right, like, let's get into that. So it's weird.
I agree.
It goes a lot.
Yeah, I'm not clear on what he means by that either.
I think as a neuroscientist, like I've had, like one of my teachers is very involved in the philosophy of mind, and he would tell us that it's like, if a neuroscientist will tell you they're a physicalist, and then you tell them like 4 distinctions, like 4 layers deep of just like, but you can't say that because of this. And then they'll be like, oh yeah. And you're like, you're a dualist. And they'll be like, yeah, okay. Like they don't care. Like they're not interested in that. That's not their job. But it's like the philosophical lingo is just not present to them in their like the distinctions are just not there. And so when you get down to it, it's like is a memory just a physical brain state? And they're like, yeah. And it's like the memory, like the picture of my mom at the beach, that's a physical brain state. Well, it's caused by a physical brain state. Yeah. But it's not the thing. Where is the picture thought? It's not in the head. It's not in the body. It's nowhere. It's just presented to the subject. They're like, yeah, okay. So there's a subject and a presentation, and neither of them are physical. Yeah. And it's like, then you're not a physicalist. And they're like, okay. Like it's like, why? Like it's wild because it's like you get neuroscientists like Jeffrey Schwartz who are like doing cognitive behavioral therapy research, and Schwartz is like saying is like there's definitely something going on here where the mind, which is not the same as the brain, can rewire the brain with self-talk. And this is really good for patients that have what are they get trapped in negative feedback loops and things like that. And it's like the research is getting creepily non-physical when you start using the distinctions that philosophers who are dualists or dualistic and some property dualists or whatever, you have this language available, and then they go, oh yeah, sure. Like, because that's what the data seems to say, or at least it's theory neutral.
Where has Harris made the claim that consciousness is non-physical, by the way? Is that in Waking Up?
It's no, I found it years ago. He had a YouTube video on it, and I was screaming. I was like, no way, he believes consciousness is non-physical. I was losing it. I don't have the citation, so you could just fault me for it. Or if you find it, shoot me a text, because I'd like to see how he talks about that. He might have changed it. The thing is, it's like he could have been going the way I interpreted the video. He was just saying consciousness is non-physical. But I was like, I thought it was pretty straightforward. But he could be going like a John Searle type route. Searle thinks that consciousness is non-physical, and that's just what happens with certain pieces of biology. I think that's false. And I think that when you try and argue for it, I think it goes haywire. Ned Block is somebody who pushes against this pretty hard. But John Searle is like phenomenal philosopher. And he thinks that a biological process just does spawn these non-physical conscious items that you see, like picture thoughts and memories and qualia and, phenomenological stream experience, just the movie reel you have of an idiot yelling at you through your computer screen right now, like that flow of information, that is explicable in purely physical terms. We just don't have the language for it yet in the science. That's what Searle would say. I think he's wrong about that, but it's definitely worth considering. And he is phenomenal talking about it. He's just a very good writer.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I'm sorry if this hasn't been super stimulating for all you guys. I really wanted to do a decent job kind of presenting it. I just kind of, when I look at the new atheists, I really just want to, like, when people start telling me they pay attention to these guys pretty heavily, oftentimes I just go, please, just here, I'll give you PDFs. Like, just read Graham Opie, get some good distinctions on this. I'd rather somebody have, the sort of like AC Grayling nastiness than the Richard Dawkins nastiness, because I think Grayling actually tries to do his homework. Or Bertrand Russell. I've been reading so much Bertrand Russell lately. He is the greatest. He's so fun to read. But what's it called? I have to get going because it's almost 11. I have stuff. I have things and stuff. Is there any other things that people wanted to talk about? I've been talking a lot.
No, thank you for this.
I don't have anything particular to say. I was just going to say I think you did a good job expressing a lot of the kind of laying out what some of the basic things are and generating some good conversation. So
Yeah,
it was interesting.
likewise.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jordan.
I have a lot of faith that you can do it.
Jane is going to send me a list of everything I did wrong. It's cool. Thanks for having me, you guys. I appreciate it. I wish I could have been a little bit more solid, a little bit more substantive. I think there's a lot more to say about this, but
I have faith
I'll
you'll
get
do
a
a better
next
job next time. I'm not sure it's grounded.
You have no good evidence that I will. You have no good
I have
evidence.
no good
that I will.
evidence, but I have faith.
All right.
All right. Good
All
night,
right, you
everybody.
guys.
Thank you.
Good night.
Yeah.